The last visual contact was heartbreakingly close to the top. Just 250 meters separated them from glory. 3 tiny vulnerable figures clinging to the icy facade of Gasherbrum I, battling the elements. And then in the blink of an eye, the mountain simply erased them, swallowing the team whole into a blinding, suffocating whiteout. The team, consisting of Nisar Sadpara, Gerfried Göschl, and Cédric Hählen, was in the middle of a high-stakes bid to set a historic winter record, but the peak had other plans and snapped its jaws shut. How did the legendary stamina of a self-taught Pakistani climber end up in a fatal collision with a hurricane-force storm right in the heart of the death zone? Even more baffling is the bureaucratic nightmare that followed. Why did the rescue of these stranded souls hinge not on the bravery of helicopter pilots, but on the clearance of a bank check? This narrative twists from a tale of soaring triumph into one of the most gut-wrenching tragedies in modern mountaineering. This isn't just a breakdown of a failed expedition. It is a deep dive into the destiny of an unsung legend, Nisar Sadpara. To understand the end, we must go back to the beginning, to the shadow of the colossal Karakoram range, a place where the locals are forged from tougher material than the rest of us. Sadpara isn't merely a dot on the map. It is the legendary incubator for Pakistan's greatest high-altitude warriors. It was here, in this cradle of giants, that Nisar's journey kicked off. In keeping with the traditions of his people, he adopted the name of his village, destined to carry the moniker Nisar Sadpara to the top of the world. He came into this world facing immediate headwinds, born into a household where survival was a full-time job. With 10 people crammed under one roof, relying on subsistence farming and a father's meager earnings, there was rarely enough food on the table to satisfy everyone's hunger. Life didn't offer Nisar the luxury of a childhood. It handed him a brutal ultimatum, forcing him to close his textbooks and leave school far too soon. The classroom was replaced by back-breaking manual labor, and his education continued not with pens and paper, but with sweat and grit. The young boy picked up a shepherd's staff and marched toward the vertical slopes. His new charges were herds of yaks and goats, and his workspace was a terrifyingly sheer cliff face, a place where a single stumble could mean falling to his death. Yet it was precisely here, amidst the jagged rocks and biting winds, that a diamond in the rough began to sparkle. In the rare downtime between tending the herd, the local shepherds would challenge each other to impromptu feats of athleticism. They would choose a jagged peak or a solitary tree miles away and just take off running. While his peers were left gasping for oxygen in the thin mountain air, fighting against burning lungs and heavy legs, Nisar Sadpara unveiled a gift that was nothing short of miraculous. He didn't just run, he seemed to glide completely, disregarding the laws of physics that bound everyone else. His stamina was alien, almost supernatural. Every single time he crossed the finish line, first barely breaking a sweat while others were collapsing. When the sun went down, the mood in the Sadpara household shifted. His father would trek back from his job, his clothes carrying the crisp, cold scent of the great glaciers and towering peaks. He would spin tales of elite high-altitude guides, of wealthy foreign expeditions, and of summits that scraped the edge of space. Nisar sat there, mesmerized, absorbing every word, and holding his breath as his imagination ran wild. He would gaze out at the jagged horizon, realizing that his dreams were too big for the grazing pastures. A blueprint for the future was constructing itself in his mind, a strategy that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. But fate has a way of kicking down the door rather than knocking politely. For Nisar, that life-altering moment crashed in during 1996. He was just 18 years old, standing on the precipice of adulthood. His trajectory shifted violently after a chance encounter with a man whose name commanded absolute silence and respect in the village, the legendary Ali Raza. Raza was a battle-hardened mountaineer, a veteran scarred by rock and ice, who looked at Nisar and saw more than just a farm boy with sturdy legs. Ali Raza spotted that rare cold fire burning in the teenager's eyes, the specific psychological steel required to stay alive when the air runs out. The mentor wasted no time immediately taking Nisar under his protective wing. He marched the 18-year-old straight to the organizers of a hardcore military expedition and presented him as a candidate. The objective was both massive and terrifying: Siakangri Peak. This giant looms at 7,422 meters. This is the altitude where childhood games cease to exist, and the atmosphere becomes thin, treacherous, and deadly. The expedition leaders took one look at Nisar and scoffed. They saw a kid with zero professional climbing resume and no track record to speak of. The military commanders were adamant, instantly rejecting the idea. To them, dragging a rookie up a 7,000er wasn't just a burden, it was a massive liability for the whole squad. From their perspective, trusting this boy looked like sheer insanity. It felt like the heavy iron doors to the world of elite alpinism were being slammed in Nisar's face before he even had the chance to turn the handle. But Ali Raza stood his ground, displaying a resolve as unyielding as the granite of the Karakoram itself. He gambled his own prestigious reputation on the boy. The mentor practically bullied the organizers into a second look, vouching for the teenager with his own life and honor. Crushed under the weight of Raza's authority, the leadership finally caved, reluctantly scribbling Nisar's name on the roster. The mission launched with a team of 13 men, a squad of rock-solid soldiers and veteran climbers. In that lineup, Nisar Sadpara was the undeniable outlier, the odd piece of the puzzle, but that perception only lasted until the real climbing started. As always, the mountain quickly stripped away pretenses and showed everyone where they truly stood. The brutal slopes of Siakangri acted as a filter, mercilessly weeding out anyone with a crack in their physical or mental armor. Step by agonizing step, the group shrank. Men were forced to retreat to base camp, their dreams of the summit shattered by exhaustion. By the time the final push for the top began, only a tiny fraction of the most resilient climbers remained. When they finally stood on the roof of the world, only 4 men were left. And there, at an altitude cruising jets fly at, stood young Nisar. At just 18 years of age, he had pulled off a feat that takes most professionals a decade to master. He cemented his name in the record books as one of the youngest climbers in Pakistani history to smash the 7,000-meter barrier. The rush of that victory was more potent than any narcotic. Standing there with the clouds beneath his boots, the realization hit him hard. There was no way he could ever go back to a mundane life in the valley below. The mountains had claimed him as one of their own, and he belonged to them now. Generally, the death zone above 8,000 meters is no playground for a teenager. It is a hostile domain where every single upward step requires a colossal payment of energy, and a bottle of oxygen is worth more than a bar of gold. But in 1999, a young challenger appeared on the Baltoro Glacier, ready to rewrite the rulebook. Nisar Sadpara showed up at the base of the formidable Gasherbrum II, ready for war. This was the world's 13th highest mountain, and he wasn't there to sightsee. He arrived as a high-altitude porter, the engine of the expedition, the guy upon whose back the survival of the entire team rests. He had been contracted by a South Korean team led by the stern, no-nonsense Lee Sang-bai. For these Korean alpinists, rigid discipline and years of experience were the holy grail of survival. When they laid eyes on Nisar, they didn't show respect. They showed open disdain. They looked at him and saw a scrawny kid, barely more than a child, who looked like he should be worrying about homework, not preparing to siege the shining mountain. A crisis erupted immediately in base camp. The expedition leadership convened an emergency meeting with a harsh agenda. The verdict was unanimous. The kid is too young, too green, and he's going to get us all killed. There was a serious conversation about putting him on the next transport home before the climb even started, just to mitigate the risk. For Nisar, this was the ultimate moment of truth. His entire career was on the verge of being extinguished before it sparked, crushed by the bias of foreign clients. He felt the crushing weight of their judgment, but rather than pleading his case with words, he decided to let his work do the talking. The first rotation began hauling massive loads up to Camp 1. This is a grueling slog through a treacherous icefall, a chaotic landscape of shifting glaciers and hidden crevasses waiting to swallow the hesitant. Nisar strapped on a pack that weighed a ton and hit the route. Then he did something that left everyone speechless. While the veteran climbers were wheezing, fighting for breath, and struggling under their gear, the 20-year-old virtually sprinted up the ice. He displayed a level of physical conditioning that made the arguments against him evaporate instantly. Nisar rolled into Camp 1, looking fresh, fast, and ready for another lap. When the Korean team watched him moving on the slope, their skepticism morphed into jaw-dropping amazement. The expedition leaders did something almost unheard of in their strict hierarchy. They issued a formal apology to the young porter for underestimating him. The ascent pressed on, but this time Nisar wasn't just the help. He was an integral part of the attack squad. He triumphantly reached the summit of Gasherbrum II, bagging his first 8,000er. What started as an attempt to fire him evolved into a rock-solid professional brotherhood. The expedition leader, Lee Sang-bai, was so blown away by the young man's performance that this season became merely the opening chapter of a long-shared history between them. Looking ahead, this expedition leader would go on to recruit Nisar for his teams 7 separate times, consistently entrusting him with the most grueling and critical objectives. He understood a harsh truth: while the mountains offer absolutely no forgiveness for mistakes, they are also prone to launching preemptive strikes, attacking even those who execute every move with perfection. The calendar has turned to the year 2000. Nisar finds himself back in the rugged heart of the Karakoram range, this time setting up camp at the base of Broad Peak. As the 12th highest summit on the planet, the mountain looms overhead, a silent, imposing sentinel awaiting his return. Once again, he has signed on to support a Korean expedition, but the dynamic has shifted entirely. He no longer carries the light load of a novice. He bears the heavy mantle of a battle-tested veteran. On the surface, the route appears standard and the weather cooperative, but the mountain has drafted its own brutal itinerary for the season, one that cares little for human plans. During the arduous slog up to the first high-altitude camp, a piercing shriek suddenly tears through the thin, frigid air. A stray rock shaken loose from the crumbling cliffs far above comes hurtling down the face, bouncing on a chaotic and deadly trajectory. It finds its target with sickening precision. The stone slams directly into Nisar's head with a force that would shatter the resolve of a lesser man. In any other second, on any other peak, such a catastrophic impact would have instantly marked the termination of the expedition. For the vast majority of climbers, a blow like that is an immediate ticket home. The terrifying prospect of losing consciousness or suffering a brain bleed at an altitude where the human body is already deteriorating makes the risk of continuing simply too high to justify. But Nisar operates on a different frequency. He hastily wraps the gushing wound with makeshift bandages, pausing only for a fleeting heartbeat to steady his nerves. There is no trace of panic in his movements, only a cold, calculating resolve and a stubborn refusal to bow down. Instead of retreating to the safety and medical aid of base camp, he adjusts his pack and turns his face upward. Step by agonizing step, he resumes his assault on the 8,047-meter giant, climbing straight into the death zone with a bloody bandage around his head. When he finally stands atop the summit of Broad Peak, it represents a triumph, not merely over the rock and ice, but over the absolute limits of human physiology. This gritty feat cements his status as a legend, among his peers the unstoppable Pakistani who took a blow to the skull and kept climbing. 3 years drift by, bringing us to 2003. Nisar has evolved beyond the point of simply surviving the harsh conditions of the high peaks. He is beginning to dictate the terms of engagement, moving with a confidence that unnerves even experienced alpinists. He senses a reserve of power within himself, a belief that he is capable of more than just a single conquest per season. He sets his sights on Gasherbrum II, the hidden peak, a mountain that stands taller and presents greater technical challenges than its neighbors at 8,068 meters. Nisar executes the climb with precision, successfully navigating the route and adding another coveted 8,000er to his growing resume. However, for a man of his ambition, reaching the bottom after the descent is not the conclusion of the job, it is merely the intermission. While the rest of the team is popping champagne and packing their gear for the journey home, Nisar's gaze drifts toward the neighboring giant. In that same season, with barely a moment to let his muscles recover, he prepares to pull off something truly incredible. For the second time in his professional career, he summits Gasherbrum II, bagging 2 8,000-meter peaks, or repeating such a grueling feat in a single summer requires a level of colossal endurance that borders on the superhuman. But for Nisar, this intensity is quickly becoming his standard operating procedure. It was during this specific season, amidst the howling icy winds and the transient tent life of base camp, that a pivotal encounter occurred. Nisar crossed paths with the Austrian alpinist Gerfried Göschl, a meeting that would fundamentally shape the trajectory of his future. Although a vast cultural chasm and a significant language barrier lay between them, the mountains have a way of bridging such gaps. In the high peaks, risk and trust form a universal dialect that requires no translation. In the quiet strength of the Pakistani guide, Göschl recognized a kindred spirit, a man who, much like himself, felt truly alive, only in the vertical world. This friendship, forged on the unforgiving slopes of the Gasherbrums, would grow into one of the most potent and fateful alliances in Nisar's life. If the Gasherbrums served as a brutal test of his physical endurance, then K2 was the ultimate final exam attest, where failure often meant there would be no second chance to study. The timeline moves to the year 2004. The entire mountaineering community is holding its breath in anticipation. This is no ordinary season. It is the Golden Jubilee, a historic celebration charged with electricity. Exactly 50 years prior, humanity had first conquered the summit of the Savage Mountain, and now Pakistan is determined to commemorate that anniversary with flair. A massive joint expedition with China is assembled, and Nisar Sadpara receives the kind of invitation one simply does not refuse. He is selected for the summit team, the tip of the spear. For this mission, he is paired with Hassan Sadpara, another titan of the local mountains. Together they integrate seamlessly, functioning not as two individuals, but as a single well-oiled machine. They communicate without the need for spoken language, relying on instincts sharpened by decades of survival on the glaciers. Their objective is to ascend to 8,611 meters via the Abruzzi Spur, a notorious route that punishes even the slightest hint of weakness. Once climbers enter the death zone, the lack of oxygen transforms them into sluggish, stumbling shadows of their former selves. Their brains begin to starve. Every simple motion demands a titanic exertion of will, and the oxygen canister strapped to their backs becomes the fragile lifeline tethering them to existence. Yet once again, Nisar proceeds to shatter every conventional understanding of human biology. He flatly refuses to utilize supplemental oxygen. While his companions are gasping desperately for every molecule of air, he utters a phrase that leaves the medical team utterly baffled. "The higher I go, the better I feel." It is as if his physiology shifts into a different gear, thriving in the thin atmosphere, where others drift into unconsciousness. On July 27th, the skies clear and a weather window creates an opening. The summit team launches their final desperate push. They carefully navigate the infamous bottleneck, passing directly beneath a terrifying hanging ice serac that threatens to collapse at any second. Step by excruciating step, with their crampons biting into the bullet-hard ice, they inch toward their objective. And then suddenly there is no more mountain to climb. There is only the vast expanse of the sky. In that transcendent moment, Nisar Sadpara inscribes his name into the history books in letters of gold. He is just 24 years old. Standing proudly on the summit of the world's second highest peak, he claims the title of the youngest Pakistani to ever accomplish this feat. But while this is a massive personal record for his community, the event carries a far profounder significance. Nisar becomes the very first native of Baltistan, the harsh, beautiful land where these giants reside, to look down upon the planet from the top of K2. This triumph shifts the paradigm completely. He is no longer viewed merely as a talented porter or a dependable support climber. In the eyes of the global mountaineering elite, he has ascended to their ranks. The success of the Jubilee expedition splashes across headlines nationwide, but for Nisar, the media frenzy serves only as confirmation that he is walking his true path. The mountains have embraced him as one of their own, and at the top of the world he feels entirely at peace. After conquering K2, one might assume there are no greater heights to reach, yet Nisar Sadpara discovers a way to astonish even those who believe they have seen everything the mountains can offer. The summer of 2006 arrives. Nisar has reached the absolute apex of his physical potential, operating like a finely tuned biological engine. He feels a surge of power so intense that the standard limitations of high-altitude mountaineering no longer seem to apply to him. Conspiring with his trusted partner, Hassan Sadpara, he devises a daring plan that sounds like sheer madness to the conservative climbing community. They decide that they will not choose between the peaks. They will take them all. Their target is the Gasherbrum Double. These are two massive 8,000ers standing shoulder to shoulder, yet each one demands total commitment and laser-like focus to survive. On July 16th, the duo initiates the execution of their audacious scheme. They successfully summit Gasherbrum II, the very mountain where Nisar's high-altitude career first gained traction. By this juncture, he has already stood atop this peak twice before. The third ascent is executed flawlessly. They reach the elevation of 8,035 meters, log their success, and commence the descent. In a standard expedition, this would be the moment to declare victory and go home. Usually, climbers would retreat to base camp, sip hot tea, accept accolades, and spend weeks recovering from the trauma. But Nisar and Hassan tear up the script. They descend only long enough to catch their breath, before immediately pivoting toward the neighboring giant Gasherbrum I. There is zero time allocated for a full recovery. Their bodies are running in overdrive, completely ignoring the accumulated fatigue and the crushing oxygen debt building up in their blood. They utilize their existing acclimatization as a springboard, launching an attack on the second summit, while the echoes of their first victory are still ringing through the camp. On July 22nd, a mere 6 days after standing on the first peak, they are planting their flags on the summit of Gasherbrum I. The scale of what they have achieved is difficult for the human mind to fully grasp. 2 8,000ers conquered in just 7 days. One single week, 2 summits from the list of the world's deadliest mountains. In the realm of elite alpinism, this is known as a golden double. The local press explodes with headlines celebrating the establishment of a new record. Journalists describe the achievement as unique, noting that such a combination of speed and endurance is vanishingly rare. For Nisar personally, this grueling week serves as the ultimate validation of his phenomenal physical conditioning. He realizes with certainty that his body can withstand loads that would break other men. He does not merely survive in the death zone. He inhabits it, moving at a pace that remains untouchable for the ordinary climber. This 2-peak marathon permanently cements his reputation as one of the fastest and most durable high-altitude climbers of his generation, proving he is ready to face absolutely any challenge the Karakoram dares to throw at him. Most climbers take their chips off the table after one big win, convinced that tempting fate a second time is a fool's game. But Nisar Sadpara didn't view the mountains as a lottery where you quit while you're ahead. To him, these peaks were complex mathematical equations waiting to be solved. Fresh off a phenomenal double victory on the Gasherbrums, the idea of slowing down never even crossed his mind. The calendar turned to 2007. He locked his sights back onto Gasherbrum I this time, embedding himself within a joint expedition alongside Chinese climbers. For Nisar, this wasn't a struggle for survival. It was like a professor reviewing his own lecture notes. He topped out on the summit with the casual confidence of a man walking into his own living room, checking to see if the mountain remembered the weight of his boots. Standing there, the grand map of Pakistan stretched out before him, dominated by the Big Five, the 8,000-meter titans that make up the crown jewels of the nation's mountaineering. His mental checklist was nearly complete. The Savage K2, the twin Gasherbrum giants, and Broad Peak had all surrendered to him. 4 down. Only one elusive monster remained to complete the set. Nanga Parbat, a lone wolf separated from the main Karakoram cluster rising violently out of the Himalayas. They call it the Naked Mountain because its vertical walls are so terrifyingly steep that snow refuses to stick to the rock. It holds a dark reputation as one of the deadliest environments on Earth. In 2008, Nisar decided it was time to close the book on this challenge, teaming up once again with his brother-in-arms Nisar Sadpara. By this point, they moved as a single organism, a duo, that communicated through intuition rather than words. Together, they marched to the base of the Killer Mountain, staring up at 8,126 meters of vertical hell. Nanga Parbat is notorious for its psychotic weather patterns and the sheer crushing distance from base camp to the peak. But Nisar played the long game, managing his energy reserves with surgical discipline. The summer gods smiled on them, offering a rare window of calm. They battled through labyrinths of blue ice and crumbling rock towers until there was nowhere left to climb. Nisar Sadpara stood on the roof of the Naked Mountain. Breathing the thin metallic air, the magnitude of what he had just done hit him harder than the cold. In that split second, the trap of ambition snapped shut. The mission was accomplished. He had successfully collected the final jewel for his crown. With that step, Nisar etched his name into history as only the third Pakistani to ever conquer all 5 of his homeland's 8,000ers, walking in the footsteps of legends like Rajab Shah and his partner Hassan. It was official. He had kicked down the doors of an exclusive club, gaining entry to a circle reserved for the very best. Coming down from the clouds, he was welcomed back to the warmth of his village as a conquering hero. The scene shifted to the polished halls of Islamabad, where the Alpine Club of Pakistan held a formal ceremony to hand him the certificate that proved his greatness. The stamped paper was just ink and pulp, but it symbolized a massive truth. A kid who grew up in the dust of Sadpara village had risen to become a national icon, the master of every high-altitude challenge his country could throw at him. But eventually, the flashbulbs burn out and the applause dies down. Nisar woke up back in the real world where accolades don't put food on the table. To him, the death zone wasn't a playground. It was the world's most dangerous office cubicle. Every time he crossed the 8,000-meter line, he was signing a contract with the Reaper, trading his life expectancy for his family's security. He knew better than anyone that the mountaineering industry was fickle. The flow of foreign expeditions could dry up as quickly as a mountain storm rolls in. It was feast or famine tourists. Today, empty pockets tomorrow. So every rupee clawed from the ice was immediately funneled into something permanent, something that wouldn't melt away. He looked at his family and swore the cycle of backbreaking labor would stop with him. In the bustling market town of Skardu, far removed from the silent glaciers, he set his brother up with a shoe shop. It wasn't an empire, just a modest storefront, but to Nisar, those shelves were more valuable than gold medals. It was a safety net that ensured the family would stay afloat, even if the mountain claimed him one day. But his investment in the future went deeper. He wired a chunk of his hard-earned cash all the way to the humid, chaotic streets of Karachi. That money was for Hamid, his younger brother, who was chasing a degree at a university on the other side of the country. Nisar was literally buying Hamid a way out, ensuring his hands would hold a pen and rest on a desk, rather than gripping an ice axe while dangling over a void. Yet beneath this hardened provider exterior beat the heart of a visionary who was beginning to feel the walls of the Karakoram closing in. He had conquered his backyard. Now his eyes drifted across borders. He started dreaming of the big one, the roof of the world, Mount Everest. For a Pakistani porter, climbing Everest is usually a fantasy. The permit fees and travel costs to Nepal are astronomical. But Nisar had an ace up his sleeve. His friend and climbing partner, the Austrian Gerfried Göschl, recognized that Nisar was a generational talent. Göschl made a blood pact once they cleared their current objectives. He would handle the logistics and hunt down sponsors to get Nisar to the Himalayas. This wasn't just a trip, it was a key to the VIP room of global mountaineering, a world Nisar had only heard about in the campfire stories of wealthy Western clients. But Nisar's vision went beyond bragging rights. He vividly remembered scrambling up slopes in cheap plastic sandals, clueless and ill-equipped. He wanted to rewrite the script for the next generation. His grand design was to establish a legitimate climbing school right in the heart of Sadpara village. He wanted to be the mentor he never had, teaching technical skills and safety protocols. His goal was to transform local boys from beasts of burden into certified professionals. He was building a legacy, dreaming of a future where his tiny village would be known as a factory for world-class champions, not just disposable labor. Fast forward to 2011, and Nisar Sadpara was operating at a stratospheric level of competence. He returned to Gasherbrum II, embedded in yet another high-profile international team. For most humans, touching the void at 8,000 meters is the pinnacle of their existence, a story to dine out on for decades. But for Nisar, it was just another day at the office. He navigated the death zone with practiced ease, hit the summit, and descended without drama. However, this specific summit carried heavy significance in the record books. It marked his 10th confirmed descent of an 8,000er. He had shattered the ceiling, overtaking every other climber in his nation's history. Officially, Nisar Sadpara stood alone as Pakistan's most accomplished high-altitude athlete. But the mountains have a way of raising the stakes. A new challenge was brewing, one that required more than just lungs of steel and strong legs. His longtime friend Gerfried Göschl came to him with a proposition that was borderline insanity. He invited Nisar to join a winter expedition to Gasherbrum I. This wasn't business as usual. Typically, Nisar was the hired muscle, the high-altitude porter paid to haul gear and babysit clients. But Göschl wasn't hiring a porter. He was recruiting a teammate. He offered Nisar a seat at the table as a full equal partner. That gesture flipped a switch in Nisar's brain. For his whole life, the glaciers had been a means to an end, a paycheck to feed the family. Now the paradigm shifted. He was accepting a suicide mission, not for money, but for the glory of the sport. Nisar wanted to etch his name into the bedrock of history by attempting a first-ever winter ascent on a completely new route. He told his inner circle that the money didn't matter anymore. He simply needed to be part of this odyssey. The pragmatic provider died, and the explorer was born. No longer the invisible support staff, he stepped into the spotlight as a titan of the game, ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with the European elite and siege a frozen fortress in the dead of winter. You can trust high-tech radar systems all you want, but human intuition, that's the warning system you simply cannot ignore. Inside the Sadpara family home, those internal alarm bells weren't just ringing, they were screaming deafeningly loud. The calendar read early January, the dead of winter, a season when anyone with a lick of sense stays huddled near a warm fire. But not Nisar. He is busy packing his kit. Watching him is his father, Ali Sher, a man whose heart sinks with every piece of gear that goes into the bag. He is a veteran of high-altitude hell, and he knows the bitter truth better than anyone. You cannot compare the Karakoram in summer to the beast it becomes in winter. The mountains morph into a frozen white wasteland where a single misstep doesn't just mean injury, it means you don't come home. Ali Sher is usually a man of few words, but he breaks his silence now. He practically gets on his knees begging his son to reconsider, pleading with him to just skip this one season. The old climber describes a cold so vicious it freezes the air inside your chest, before you can even exhale, and he talks about winds strong enough to flick a grown man off a ridge like he's nothing more than a dried-up leaf. It is a desperate, terrifying warning from a father who can feel the shadow of death creeping over the horizon. But Nisar operates on a different frequency. For him, a code of honor outweighs the instinct for self-preservation. He explains to his father that this isn't just a gig he can walk away from. It's deeper than that. Gerfried Göschl. The expedition leader didn't just hire Nisar as help, he handpicked him. He made it clear that Nisar was the spine of this entire operation. To back out now would feel like stabbing a friend in the back, the same friend who lifted him up from being just another porter to a full-fledged climbing partner. So on January 5th, Nisar walks out the door. He leaves the relative safety of Skardu behind and heads toward the starting line, marching steadily toward a destiny that is already carved into the ice waiting for him. When the crew finally comes together at base camp, they don't look like hikers. Geared up to the teeth, they look like a squad of astronauts dropped onto the surface of a hostile alien planet. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Nisar and Göschl is an elite lineup, Cédric Hählen bringing that Swiss mechanical precision, Alex Chicon, the Spaniard with an endless fuel tank of energy, and Louis Rousseau, a Canadian veteran with years of hard-won experience. They gaze up at the peak, but they aren't eyeing the standard tourist track. This is where the story takes a dark turn. The group pivots away from the established path and locks their sights on the southwest face. That route is practically a ghost story. It has been sitting there abandoned for 25 years, untouched by human ambition because it is a nightmare of difficulty. Trying that face in the summer is bold, bordering on arrogant. Trying to conquer it in winter, that is absolute insanity. And almost immediately the mountain wakes up and decides to fight back. They step into an environment that actively wants them dead. The mercury slams down to minus 40 degrees Celsius, a level of cold where touching bare metal burns your skin just like firewood. But the freezing temperatures have a partner in crime, the wind. It is not just breezy, it is violent. Gusts scream through the valley at over 100 kilometers per hour, battering their tiny tents and threatening to peel the entire camp right off the glacier. Every single second spent outside the sleeping bag becomes a war just to keep your body heat. The board is set for a tragedy, a route the world forgot, weather bent on destruction, and a ticking clock counting down to a window of opportunity that might never actually open. In the death zone, patience isn't a virtue. It is a double-edged sword that can cut you at any second. By the time late February rolls around, the team is trapped in a scenario that is more draining than the climbing itself. Logistics aren't the problem. The high camps are fully stocked, and the ropes are fixed along the route. The gear is primed and ready to go, but the mountain refuses to yield. The climbers are stuck in their nylon shelters listening to the freight train roar of the wind, praying for a moment of mercy that the heavens just won't grant. Every week of delay rots their acclimatization and incinerates their morale. They are like Olympic sprinters crouched in the starting blocks, muscles tensed, waiting for a gun that just won't go off. Finally, on March 7th, static on the radio clears to reveal the voice they have been dying to hear. The meteorologists have spotted a crack in the storm's armor. The forecast promises a short lull, a narrow weather window they might be able to squeeze through to tag the summit. It is not a guarantee of success, just a gamble. But the team grabs it without a second thought. They know deep down this is the last roll of the dice for the season. The three lead climbers launch their final assault, clawing their way up the ice walls. However, the mountain begins weeding out the contenders before the real battle even begins. The drama hits at Camp 2. Alex Chicon, arguably one of the strongest engines in the group, hits his limit. He looks down at his hands and realizes with sinking dread that the game is over for him. The cold has already bitten him hard. His fingers are showing the early signs of frostbite, and the accumulated fatigue turns every motion into an ordeal. Alex makes the gut-wrenching decision, which happens to be the only one that keeps him alive. He chooses to stay behind. He watches his comrades fade into the white void above, disappearing into the mist. Now the squad is down to 3: Nisar Sadpara, Gerfried Göschl, and Cédric Hählen. They have become the tip of a spear thrust straight at the sky, but the higher they climb, the more nature seems offended by their presence. On March 8th, that promised weather window slams shut before it even opens. Conditions don't just deteriorate, they collapse fast. The temperature plunges to catastrophic depths, minus 45 degrees. In that kind of deep freeze, any patch of skin exposed to the air goes numb instantly. And the wind. The forecast said it would die down, but it does the exact opposite. It intensifies. Gusts reach 120 kilometers per hour. This is no longer just air moving. It is a physical wall of pressure trying to scrub them off the face of the mountain. Visibility drops to zero, and landmarks dissolve in a swirling white soup. Logic dictates they should turn back while they still have the strength. But these climbers are locked in a trance. They have tunnel vision focused entirely on the goal. The trio continues to push upward, believing they can still thread the needle and tag the top before the storm seals their fate for good. They are betting everything on speed, trying to outrun a hurricane. It is one of those moments where history puts different people in the same space only to hand them wildly different destinies. On March 9th, a scene straight out of a Greek tragedy unfolds on the summit of Gasherbrum I, where ultimate triumph and horrific catastrophe occupy the exact same second in time. The morning kicks off with a massive victory. A Polish expedition, having wisely chosen the classic route from the northwest, achieves the impossible. They crest the summit, etching their names into the record books as the first humans to conquer this peak in winter. They stand where the air is as thin as a razor blade, celebrating a miracle. Simultaneously, on the other side of the mountain, a satellite phone flickers to life. It is 10:30 in the morning. Gerfried Göschl is on the line, punching a signal through to the outside world. You can hear the tension in his voice mixed with that unmistakable thrill-seeker's edge. He reports their coordinates. The group is hovering at an altitude of roughly 7,600 meters. Only 450 vertical meters remain to the summit. For a trained athlete at sea level, that is nothing more than an easy jog. But here, deep in the death zone, that distance represents hours of brutal lung-crushing warfare against gravity. They keep grinding, ignoring the screaming fatigue. But a few hours later, the perspective shifts dramatically. Around 2 in the afternoon, the Polish climbers are already beginning their descent. They are rushing to get down, sensing the mountain's mood changing. As they glance back at the south face, they freeze. In the distance among the endless snow and jagged rock, they can make out 3 tiny silhouettes. It is not a hallucination from hypoxia. It is Nisar, Gerfried, and Cédric. They are still climbing up. This sighting is confirmed by Alex Chicon down below. Stuck in the lower camp, he is glued to his binoculars, desperately scanning for his friends through breaks in the clouds. He locks onto those 3 dots. By his calculations, they are critically close to their goal. Only 250 meters separate them from the summit, on a Himalayan scale that is practically within arm's reach. It seems like one more push, and they will be standing next to the Polish flag. And this is where the most terrifying contrast of the day emerges. The two groups are within sight of each other, yet they are moving in opposite directions. The Poles, having already claimed their glory, are fleeing the approaching threat to escape the cold, while the others march straight into it. Nisar and his crew, however, were doing the exact opposite. They weren't retreating. They were marching straight into the beast's mouth. While one group was scrambling down, desperate for the safety of base camp, Nisar's team pushed upward, climbing steadily toward a fate that was anything but certain. From below, witnesses squinted at the vast white canvas of the mountain. They could just make out the tiny black specks moving against the snow, fragile, determined figures. None of the onlookers knew it yet, but they were witnessing a final act. Those specks would never be seen again. It all came down to those final 250 meters. That short stretch wasn't just physical distance, it was the razor-thin boundary between glory and oblivion. Crossing it meant the difference between a hero's welcome back home and fading into the eternal silence of the peaks. Then the mountain slammed the door shut. It was like a heavy curtain dropping right at the climax of a play, abruptly ending the performance. 1 minute, those 3 distinct dots were visible, inching closer to their dream. The next, the Karakoram made the call. The show was over. Visibility didn't just fade, it was extinguished. Imagine standing in a windowless room and having someone kill the lights. That is how fast it happened. A ferocious whiteout consumed the summit of Gasherbrum II, erasing all definition. Sky, earth, mountain, it all blended into a blinding, suffocating white void. At that specific moment, nature decided to unleash its ultimate weapon. It doesn't matter how much willpower you have, how many years of experience you've logged, or how advanced your gear is, nothing stops this. A kinetic blow of absolute monstrous force hammered the ridge. Calling this a blizzard would be an insult. This was a full-blown hurricane, a jet stream fury that usually stays high in the stratosphere. The wind didn't just blow, it screamed, accelerating to over 150 kilometers per hour in a matter of seconds. When you are up at 8,000 meters, wind like that isn't just air anymore, it is a physical solid. It hits you like a brick wall. It sweeps your legs out from under you, sucks the oxygen right out of your lungs, so you can't breathe, and tears tools like ice axes right out of your frozen grip. In a tempest like that, a human being is about as stable as a dry leaf getting sucked into a jet turbine. You are helpless. And the worst part, there is absolutely nowhere to hide. The route they were navigating was a knife-edge ridge offering zero shelter. You won't find any cozy rocky alcoves or protective caves up there. It is just desolate open space, completely exposed to the wrath of the planet's winds. When experts sat down later to piece together the disaster, they all arrived at the same grim logical conclusion. The climbers were simply blown off the face of the mountain. It likely happened in the blink of an eye, a fraction of a second, and then they were gone. The physics of the situation are cold and merciless. Think about it when a wind gust of that magnitude slams into a body that is already depleted from hours of grueling climbing gravity takes over. Staying upright is physically impossible. The only real mystery is which direction fate decided to toss them. On one side of the ridge lies the vast expanse of China. On the other side, you have the terrifying, bottomless abysses of the Pakistani southern slopes. It doesn't matter which way they fell. Either trajectory results in a plunge into the void, a drop of several kilometers that guarantees there is absolutely no chance of survival. The most gut-wrenching part of this entire tragedy is that it remains shrouded in the fog of the unknown. No one on Earth can pinpoint exactly where the fatal blow struck. Did they manage to push through those final 250 meters before the wind took them? Did Nisar actually plant his boot on the summit, securing his legacy as a winter pioneer? Or did the raw elements cut them down just one agonizing step away from ultimate triumph we will never know? That is a secret the mountain has claimed for itself forever. Meanwhile, thousands of meters below in the base camp and the intermediate tents, a heavy silence settled in. It was a thick, suffocating quiet, the kind that is infinitely more terrifying than a scream. Teammates jammed their radios against their ears, straining to hear anything through the static, praying for Gerfried's voice or Nisar's. They were desperate for a signal, a shout of victory, or even a panicked plea for help. But the radio offered nothing. Calls went out into the void, but nothing came back. As the minutes ticked by, the hope in the camp began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, sinking realization. In the pit of everyone's stomach, the group was gone. They had essentially dissolved into the white noise of the storm. No GPS coordinates, no final goodbye, not a single trace left behind. Everyone on the ground understood clearly that a massive catastrophe had just taken place. In a crisis like this, time is the only currency that matters. Every second counts. The only shot at rescue is from the air, so the expedition managers wasted no time contacting Askari Aviation. They are the only outfit in Pakistan with choppers powerful enough to operate at those extreme altitudes. You would think logically that the rescue machine would kick into gear automatically. The moment distress is signaled, the bird should be in the air right. Wrong. Instead of the thumping roar of rotor blades, a heavy oppressive silence hung over the glacier. And this wasn't due to the weather. It was due to red tape. A bureaucratic wall stood between the rescuers and the victims, and this was one obstacle an ice axe couldn't break. Then a shocking detail came to light. It turned out the tour operator in charge of logistics had failed to pay the mandatory insurance deposit. The price tag for that failure, $10,000. That is exactly what it costs just to fire up the engines of a high-altitude rescue helicopter. For the military pilots, the rules are black and white. They follow strict protocols. If the money isn't in the account, the chopper does not leave the ground. It sounds harsh, but it isn't personal cruelty from the pilots. It is simply a broken system where a financial guarantee holds more weight than a human life. Nobody in the chain of command is willing to authorize an expensive high-risk flight without seeing the cash confirmation first. And so the most agonizing chapter of this drama began. While Nisar and his team might have been clinging to life somewhere at 7,000 meters, battling the elements, the people below were stuck making endless phone calls in warm offices between Islamabad and Skardu. March 10th was completely wasted on arguments and finger-pointing. March 11th evaporated, while everyone waited for faxes, emails, and bank confirmations to clear. By March 12th, there was still nothing but silence. The critical window, those golden hours where rescue is actually possible, was slipping away. The entire global mountaineering community watched this unfold with a sense of helpless, boiling rage. The great mountain had become a deadly trap, and the keys to unlock it were stuck in a bank vault. This bureaucratic deadlock only broke when the situation escalated to an international level. Because Gerfried Göschl, an Austrian citizen, was among the missing his embassy stepped in, The diplomats didn't mess around. They acted fast and decisively. They put up the necessary financial guarantees on their own authority, essentially forcing the rusty gears of the bureaucratic machine to finally turn. It wasn't until an official letter from the ambassador landed on the desk that the military finally gave the green light for the helicopters to take off. The birds were finally prepped and ready on March 13th. That is a full 4 days after the group vanished. This incident exploded into a major scandal, ripping the mask off the high-altitude climbing industry and exposing its ugly underbelly. The message was clear: if your insurance isn't perfect, or the deposit isn't paid, help isn't coming. It doesn't matter if the sky is blue and the tank is full. When the roar of rotors finally broke the silence over the Baltoro Glacier, it didn't bring relief. It brought a heavy, crushing sense of finality. Everyone sitting in that cabin knew the grim truth. The chances of finding a human being alive after nearly a week stranded in the death zone were practically zero. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was a flight for answers. It was a desperate attempt to bring the grieving families some closure, or at the very least, the bodies of the men they loved. Inside the helicopter, the mood was somber. For the passengers, this wasn't just an operation. It was a personal nightmare. Wolfgang Göschl was strapped in. He had flown all the way from Austria to find his missing brother Gerfried. Sitting right next to him was Nisar Sadpara, staring blankly out the window. For Hassan, this flight was a unique form of torture. He wasn't just scanning the snow for a random climber. He was searching for a piece of himself. Nisar was his climbing partner and his close friend, the man he had shared the glorious triumphs of the Golden Week with and endured countless freezing nights on vertical walls alongside. Now Hassan hung suspended in the air, utterly powerless to save the friend who had been with him through hell and back. And nature seemed to be mocking them, offering up absolutely pristine weather conditions for the search now that it was too late. The sky was a piercing crystal blue with unlimited visibility. The pilots were performing absolute miracles of aviation, pushing those machines to the very edge of their operational altitude limits. They climbed all the way to 7,400 meters, hovering dangerously close to the sheer walls of the hidden peak. The choppers swept over the new route on the southwest face and then pivoted to scan the classic descent path. Eyes strained, scanning every single meter of the snowfield. They were desperate for any splash of color that might break up the endless, monotonous white. A bright red jacket, a tent fabric, a discarded backpack, or even a faint track in the snow. But the mountain gave them nothing but icy silence. Below the rotors, there was only a terrifying emptiness. The storm that had raged on March 9th hadn't just killed the climbers. It had wiped the slate clean, polishing the slopes to a mirror-like sheen. There were no bodies, no scraps of shredded gear, no scratches from ice axes, nothing. It created the eerie, haunting impression that the three climbers had simply stepped off the edge of the world and vanished into thin air, leaving zero evidence they had ever existed. By March 15th, the fuel of hope had finally run dry. The pilots turned the choppers around and returned to base empty-handed. Specialists pore over every pixel of the high-resolution satellite imagery and scrutinize the flight logs, hoping for a glint of color or a shadow that shouldn't be there. But the frozen landscape reveals absolutely nothing. Faced with the harsh reality of the data, the command center is forced to make the heart-wrenching call that every rescuer dreads. The rescue mission is formally terminated. It is a moment of total surrender to the mountain, an admission that the ferocious power of the winter storm has won. Now comes the hardest part, delivering the devastating finality to the waiting families who had held on to the thinnest thread of hope. The status of Nisar Sadpara, Gerfried Göschl, and Cédric Hählen is grimly updated in the official logs. They are no longer classified as missing persons. They are now presumed lost to the elements. The peaks have claimed 3 more souls, leaving their loved ones to grapple with a lifetime of silence and questions that will never find answers in the snow. Recognition is often a cruel visitor, knocking on the door only after the house is empty. In the wake of the abandoned search, the Pakistani media landscape explodes with coverage, but every headline is heavy with the weight of grief rather than celebration. Reporters who had spent years overlooking the quiet, humble man from Sadpara suddenly scramble to eulogize him, competing to pen the most touching tribute. Across the front pages, a bittersweet title begins to circulate, branding him with the tragic moniker of the nation's unsung hero. Editorials run with stinging captions like, "Lost before he was found." It is only now that the general public begins to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the legend they have just lost. Readers are stunned to learn of his resume, marveling at his conquest of 10 separate 8,000-meter peaks and his superhuman stamina. The same question echoes across the country. How could a man of such caliber remain a ghost to us while he was still breathing? Nisar transforms into a poignant symbol of immense brilliance that went unrecognized, forced to exist in the shadows until it was too late to applaud him. Yet while the nation engages in a loud public debate over the loss of a national treasure, a far more intimate tragedy plays out in the remote village of Sadpara. Far away from the television crews and flashing cameras, the true weight of the disaster comes home. Nisar's elderly father, Ali Sher, does not receive the news through a sterile government notification or a ringing telephone. Instead, the heartbreak arrives on foot. He watches as a silent procession of his neighbors and fellow villagers slowly gathers and moves toward his doorstep. Not a single sentence is spoken, nor is one needed. The veteran guide looks into their eyes and understands immediately. In the high-altitude communities of Sadpara, this ritual is known all too well. The mountain has demanded its price, and his son is never coming home. In the capital, the government issues a formal decree announcing that Nisar Sadpara will be granted the Pride of Performance. It is one of the highest civilian distinctions the nation can bestow awarded now that he can no longer wear it. The prestigious medal he had secretly hoped to earn through his tireless climbing is handed to his grieving family as a cold token of his greatness. However, when the conversation shifts to practical survival, financial aid for the widows and orphans left behind, the promises become vague and the situation far more complex. Regardless of the politics, the name Nisar Sadpara is permanently carved into the history books of global mountaineering. He is immortalized not as a reckless victim of high-altitude ambition, but as the gold standard of climbing professionalism and strength. He is remembered as a quiet star, a powerhouse who routinely achieved the impossible without seeking applause or attention. His life story evolves into modern folklore, a tale whispered to young porters as they huddle around crackling campfires beneath the towering icy slopes of the Karakoram range. They speak of a man who moved faster than the wind and climbed higher than the clouds. They tell of how he remained up there at the very edge, where the sky meets the earth, standing watch forever as the eternal guardian of his own frozen dream.